Hey, Sally, it's Deborah. Hey, I just logged on to the afternoon thing and it says that screen share has been disabled by the host. So is that something Bill can lift for me to use my PowerPoint? Yeah, that'd be great. I was going to call him, but I can't remember what his number is. Great. Thanks, Sally. Bye-bye. send you a link to the entire video. It's an hour and 10 minutes actually. And it talks about vicarious stress, how trauma impacts the brain. And also it gives you 5 tips for soul care, spiritual care, and caring for others. It's a comprehensive look based on my training as a trauma therapist, and might be good to look at if you get a chance. If you don't, the morning session with the TED Talk gave you some basics that we're going to jump off from here. I'm just going to take another couple of seconds to wait because I see a lot of people still joining us. And if you would, it'll be helpful to, for the beginning at least, to mute your mic so that we can, so that I don't hear myself talking to myself through your speaker. Because I get really disoriented. It's enough that I hear myself talk anyway. So yeah, we'll just take another minute or two to kind of get grounded and centered. Yes.
Another suggestion, if you're new to Zoom, you can make Deborah bigger and the rest of us smaller by going up to the view. In my computer, it's up in the upper right-hand corner. And instead of the gallery view, I've clicked on speaker view so that if I need to read her lips, I can.
Oh, cool. I will not murmur then. I also have several PowerPoint slides, which we'll talk through, which I'll share my screen so you can see them. So maybe speaker view will make it easier for you to see my PowerPoint as well. So this afternoon, I wanted to follow up on all the information you didn't hear this morning, and just talk a little bit about how trauma impacts the brain specifically. And as a recap to this morning, what I'd like to say is that our brains change when we experience stress and trauma. Now, in trauma, I think of anything that overwhelms our senses when we are not prepared for it. So a car crash, a tornado, a experience of bullying or being shamed or made fun of. All of those things impact our brain, which then impact our central nervous system. And they do that in such a way that the brain changes how we operate. So let me open my PowerPoint and we'll kind of go from there.
Okay, very good. Yeah, very good. Yay, Patrick. This is your brain on trauma Friday.
Exactly. It is a fried egg. Yes. It's important to know when we experience trauma because trauma can come in many forms and it's held in our tissue, in our bodies, and it's held in our communities. So a lot of times we go into a church meeting where individuals are struggling with trauma. Sorry, there's smoke outside my window. Nothing's on fire. There are ways in which our bodies respond that we record memory differently when we experience high levels of stress and trauma. So traumatic memory is stored differently. Normally, our memories, if you think of our brain as a big filing cabinet room, and there's filing cabinets for everything, for kindergarten, for summer camp, for church worship, and you store all of your memories based on that information in different drawers in your filing cabinet in your brain. And when you want to talk about something, you pull open that drawer and you take out that happy memory and you think about it for a while, and then you put it back in the drawer and you close the drawer.
Years ago with the spreadsheet.
Traumatic memory is stored very differently in the brain. And a lot of times trauma can be experienced when we move from the amygdala, from the when our resting brain to what's called the reptilian brain. And that is the amygdala, or the fear center of our brain. When the fear center of our brain is triggered, we can only do three things. We can fight, we can flight, or we can freeze. So fight, flight, or freeze gets activated anytime we experience trauma or something that overwhelms our senses. And it also includes chronic stress and other kinds of sensory overload. So what happens with traumatic memory is that it stays all outside of that memory file, and it stays in our present moment. So for instance, we can't, yeah.
And remembering, and we'll just, I don't.
Deborah, do you have the ability to mute the people who are not muted?
I don't know.
If you can tell everybody to mute, but
Yeah,
Bill
if
should be able to
everybody
mute
would
everybody.
Mute their,
Need to respond with, so we're not going out then, but
We're hearing somebody else talk right over you.
right, I hear that too. It's making me not be able to think straight.
Yeah.
Okay, let me check to see what's on fire outside too. Nothing, we're good. So are you with me so far about the filing cabinet business and memories? So we have these memories that are stored differently when we experience stress or trauma. They are experienced in such a way that they overwhelm our sensory input. So our sight, sound, taste, smell, physical sensation are all hypervigilant, and they have a difficult time being stored away. So in essence, this memory, this traumatic memory, or this work that you're doing with trauma victims or victims of disaster or whatever, stay in your present moment. And the way that looks like is through a flashback. So for instance, you're in a car accident, and in the midst of the car accident, you bite your lip and you taste blood in your mouth and you hear breaking glass. So 2 years later, you're sitting in the dentist's chair and you taste blood in your mouth and you're right back at the car crash. Or you hear breaking glass in the kitchen and you're right back there experiencing physically, physiologically, you are experiencing the car crash again. So your central nervous system is in fight, flight, or freeze. Your heart rate goes up. You can't think straight. You can't. Sometimes a PTSD incident is so bad that it actually overtakes your ocular input, and you actually don't see what's physically in front of you. You just see the trauma again. And that's when veterans talk about being back in a war zone. They could be sitting at your Thanksgiving table, hear something that triggers this memory from the battlefield, and what they see at the table is the battlefield. What you see at the table is your relatives, but they have left and gone somewhere else. So not only is the memory always available to be activated without your choice, now the other memories that you choose to go back and think about summer camp. With traumatic memory, it is activated by your sensory input and you don't get a choice whether you go there. The other thing that traumatic memory does when it's stored is that it links then to everything else that sounds and feels similar. So for instance, if you are, let's go back to the car accident, there's breaking glass. now that car accident, breaking glass, sensory input is now linked to when your little brother threw a baseball through the window and it shattered and everybody got in trouble. It's now linked to the time when you were little and you dropped a glass at your grandma's house. So all the past memories that feel and sound to our central nervous system the same are now linked. And that's what those two train tracks are, that we now have created a link from this one incident all the way back to everything else that reminds your central nervous system of that. So there are different parts of the brain that are impacted. The frontal lobe is really important to know about because if you're working with youth, they don't have one. I try to tell parents that they're not thinking with their whole brain. So when you say, "What were you thinking?" They weren't. And that's really important for us to keep in mind because the frontal lobe cortex of the brain doesn't fully gel until about age 26 now. Used to be 18, but physiologically we're looking at an extended adolescence. So kids are not making good decisions right up to 26 years old. So the frontal lobe expresses language. It manages your higher executive function in the brain, your cognitive skills, your ability to plan, to organize, to initiate activities, to self-monitor, and control your response to outside stimuli. That's a lot of stuff not involved when the frontal lobe is not yet formed. The frontal lobe is also not available or online when we're living in the fear center of our brain, which is the amygdala. The fear response shuts down the rest because basically you don't need to plan. You just need to get out of Dodge. You need to run to save your life, or you need to fight, or you were stuck in a frozen position. So the frontal lobe of the brain isn't available to you when you're in fight, flight, or freeze. Now, the parietal lobe is that yellow piece, and it involves your sensation and your perception of the world. It's really important to understand the parietal lobe is also impacted by trauma. For instance, there was this research study. I'm not sure if I talked about it in the previous YouTube video, but let me just review it if I did. They had two sets of kids. One set traumatized, another set not traumatized, 5-year-olds. They gave them the same picture. And the picture was a picture of a car up on jacks and legs coming out from under the car, a little girl playing with a doll, a little boy playing with a ball. Now, they gave that picture to both groups and asked them two things. One, what's going on in the picture and what's going to happen next? The kids without trauma said, "Oh, Dad's fixing the car. And as soon as he's done, we're going to go to McDonald's and get French fries." The kids who'd experienced trauma, what they saw was the car's going to fall on the man and kill him. The little boy's going to steal my doll. And nobody's safe. Now, that happens in the parietal lobe, your sense of your connection and your perception of the world, whether it's safe or not, happens there. So when trauma tells this parietal lobe nothing is safe because of what we've experienced, whether it's child abuse or a car accident or whatever, the parietal lobe is in charge of telling you what your perception of the world is. So one kid goes into kindergarten and says, "Wow, all these toys to play with, and look at all these cool kids, and my teacher's gonna really love me." And another walks in and goes, "I can't function, I'm frozen in place," or "There's no safe place to be, I think I will hide in the corner," or "I have to hurt anybody who I think is gonna hurt me." It's really important to know that not everybody is seeing the world the same way you are. And it's because of what happens in the brain. The occipital lobe of the brain processes information about your senses, temperature, taste, touch, movement, all of those things. And primarily the occipital lobe is in charge of vision. So if you're in fight, flight, or freeze on some major trauma and your brain is hijacked, you can actually see in front of you the tragedy as opposed to what's really physically in front of you. So when you go into a disaster site, you've got people with deficits in many parts of their brain. The cerebellum receives sensory information from the spinal cord, and they say, research shows us that our gut is our second brain. Who would have thought? But the brain and the gut are connected by something called the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is the super highway of information between the brain and the gut. And what that looks like on a normal day is that we see something we love and we want to go for it, we want to get it, and we're going to run. And so the brain says, ooh, good things, we're going to run and get that. And it increases your heart rate, it increases your lung volume, it increases your motor activity so that you can get what you want. Well, in traumatic situations, that same information is going so that you can feel afraid in your body when nothing fearful is happening, because your brain perceives danger. And now the rest of your body is going through the motions as if there were really a danger. Have you ever sat in a meeting and all of a sudden your heart starts racing or you have a hard time breathing? Well, some part of your brain thinks you're not safe, and it is triggering the amygdala, the fear center of your brain. Let's see. So we talked a little about the amygdala. Let's move into, lots of papers. Let's move into our next slide. The brain has a right and a left side. The left brain involves the right side of the body. The right brain controls the left side of the body. Who would know? So the left brain is very logical, has words, details, science. It understands things and processes. It has names and language for things. It can do math. It does orders of things, thinking and writing. The right brain works in pictures and stories, observations, shapes, music, patterns, imagination, beauty, and possibilities. These two parts of the brain are merged, so we see this beautiful collection of what's out there. When we are overwhelmed by sensory input, the right brain is charged up. The left brain goes offline. So the left brain is not able to have the language to say what's happening to them. So you can be in a disaster site and a little kid can't tell you what's happening. They don't know the order in which things happened. A lot of sexual assault victims will years later go, I don't know if it really happened. And I don't know what, like, did this happen first? Did that happen first? Second, was it my fault? Is it something I did? And all of these right brain functions are present, but the left brain is not helping. Okay, let me go back and ask if you have any questions about right brain and left brain and trauma response in the body. Diane, we need to unmute you. ask to unmute. I clicked on that. There you go, Diane.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm thinking of people who have strokes,
Mhm.
and if their left side of their body is stroked, you know, if their left side of the body is now they have trouble lifting their hands, or
Right.
their face is okay, does that mean I need that picture again?
Oh, the other one.
Yeah. Because does that mean if their left side of their body is showing the symptoms, does that mean that it's the right brain
Yes.
that harmed?
Yes. So there
Okay.
was stroke activity in the right side of the brain. You'll see the damage on the left side of the body. Oh, I'm doing that backwards, sorry.
No, that
Um,
okay. So that the right brain, if it's the right side of the body that's harmed,
Yeah.
or if it's the left side of the body, okay, whichever side is having problems physically,
Right.
then it might mean that pictures help the person who who is having problems with their left side of their body,
Right.
because the right brain,
Mhm.
you know, or vice versa. When we're trying to
Exactly.
when we're trying to communicate with somebody with stroke, it may be helpful to think of other if they're having
Oh,
problems
yeah.
with words,
Right.
to start working with pictures, or to start working with the things that the other side of the brain can communicate with. Is that
Right. Yes. So
That's a complicated
oftentimes I would go into my mother-in-law had dementia, Alzheimer's type dementia, and her brain was being impaired by that deterioration of brain matter. She could not remember who I was. She did not know time, place, or person. So she was disoriented to where she was, what time of the day it was, what season of the year it was. But if you sat down and sang in the garden with her, boom, she had it all. So yes, you want to be able to use the part of the brain that they have the most access to. So the
okay?
right brain
So
is going to respond to music.
yeah, and so when my mother goes in and out of terrible confusion, I don't know where I am. I don't know how to get from my bedroom to the bathroom.
Right.
All this stuff. The things that when I sit with her and talk about stories from the past, or look at that picture
I
up there,
joined
that's
just
your
with
grandchild,
audio.
then you're saying that
That way
yeah,
I can
yeah,
hear this.
that's a way to help
Absolutely.
people who are under, okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really important because what they're saying is that I can't make sense of this because the making sense part of my brain isn't functioning. And I just need to be reassured I'm okay.
May I speak?
Yeah.
I'm
Yep.
not on, my photo's not there. This is Susan Roboski.
Hi,
In
Susan.
relation to what Diane was just talking about, and she says if she talks to her about this, wouldn't it be better if she shows her pictures
Oh, yeah.
rather than verbally doing something?
Yes.
Because the verbal is not working properly, so therefore it might sound like it's helping, but you need to have the picture, say, go through the photo album and talk about stuff that way, you know, where
Exactly.
she has the visual.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Yeah, and with Alzheimer's especially, it's a moving target. Parts of the brain kind of go offline intermittently and in an order. Emotions are pre-verbal language, and so when we don't have language for anything, what we're left with is our emotions, and mostly it's I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm scared. And if you can work with just those three, then you can really have an impact on whether they feel safe or not. So I don't know how many of you have read this book. Maybe it's backwards on your screen. It's called My Stroke of Insight by Jill Bolte Taylor. And she talks about how her brain shut down and she's a neuroscientist, so she was able to articulate it really well. I'm trying to find, she had a stroke on the left side of her brain, which meant as a research scientist, she was only left with pictures, stories, music, shapes, and images. And she talks about that, and she talks about it, you could lift her paragraph out of her book and put it in any spiritual context. It was like having a spiritual experience. She was just overwhelmed by what was right here and right now, the beauty of the sky and the sense of calm. And although her left brain was leaving her, she was able to articulate what it was to have a right brain experience because of the left brain stroke. And what she talks about is spiritual ecstasy. And it's a beautiful rendition of what we all hope for when we get into that relationship with God, that when we surrender our logic and our verbal and our to-do list to God, and we just center in on what's right here and now, that is a spiritual experience. So it's not that they have brain damage, so to speak. It's that they're opened up to wonder and mystery and things that you and I are, our left brains are dulling us to that almost. And so we have so much to learn from people who are functioning out of their right brain. Because, you know, meditation practices, trying to become mindful, knowing what's happening in the very moment, just being present with God, non-judgmental, filled with self-compassion and compassion for others. Those are things that people with left brain injury know how to do like that. And it is beautiful to watch. So even though I think there's parts of our brains that are the balance is wonderful, but the spiritual aspects of who we are really tied into right brain activity. And you can take those little tests online if you're more right brain than left brain. It's good to know. It's also where your comfort level is, but you can work more. For instance, maybe you want to become more right-brained. So maybe you would work with icons in meditation. You might use music a lot to connect your soul with the divine. You might use guided meditation or imagination. In Gestalt Pastoral Care, we do something called, just left. Oh, wow, my left brain had left. Anyway, in Gestalt Pastoral Care, we do this process of imagination. It's called, I know what it is now, faith imagination, where we go into a traumatic situation and we just really focus on and we get there in our imagination. And then we ask Jesus to come into the picture in our mind. So a good example would be, I had a gentleman who was struggling with his relationship with his father. And the memory he has is of sitting at the dining room table and having his father yell at him over and over and over and over. And dinner time was not fun. He developed an eating disorder throughout his life as a result of this constant bullying, and which resulted in his brain knowing that dinner with dad is not a good place, it's not safe. So maybe I get to go dinner with you and I feel unsafe again, or dinner with somebody who reminds me of my dad and I'm right back there. So what we did is, in faith imagination, we prayed and we asked him to go put himself at the dinner table with his dad. And then he asked Jesus to join him at dinner. And we just said, what is it that Jesus wants to say right now? And without dropping a beat, he says, we need to get out of here. This is awful. So where he felt not empowered as a child, Jesus came into this imaginary place and gave him the power to leave. And that process of undoing all of that trauma, he and Jesus sat and ate peanut butter and jelly in the living room. And they had a great time. And this shifted things inside of him that continued to bear healing going forward. So imagination is a really critical tool in inner healing work. Anyway, that was an aside. Excuse me. The next, any other questions? Okay. So one of the other things that's important to know about the brain is that the brain has different frequencies. The beta frequencies are like 100,000 thoughts a minute. This is, excuse me for calling you out, Diane, but this is Diane's normal place of being in beta brain. She has ideas and thoughts and she's concentrating on things and she has cognitive firing happening all the time. And for somebody like me, that's exhausting. I don't know how it feels to Diane, but so many thoughts happening all at once. And that's on a normal day. We're most of the time in beta brain. The lower vibrations are in alpha. Alpha is when you're relaxed, when you visualize things. So for instance, the difference between beta brain is I'm thinking 100,000 thoughts and then I see a squirrel and I just look at this, wow, that is an amazing, look at him eat that nut. You've now moved from many thoughts to focused thought. That's alpha brain. When we come into our devotional time, we often move from beta to alpha because now we are focused on God. We're focused on our daily practice of connecting with the divine. Theta is then a lower vibration, which is where we are sometimes in prayer. We have intuition. God speaks to us in that space. We hear ourselves say things that we don't notice we're saying to ourselves. Theta is a place where we do a lot of healing work. Because in theta, we are able to understand, like we're able to hear things, like in Gestalt, we call them interjects. Like you may be, well, like for me, I'm 62 years old and there's still something in my brain that says I'm fat and ugly. It got there long time ago. In theta, I can hear myself saying that and then bring some self-compassion to that and say, whew, I don't know where you learned that, Deborah, but you know what? You're not that, and you don't need to act out of that. And we all have those things. I call it coming up from the back of my head. So when I'm in theta, knowing, true knowledge about me as a person of God comes up out of the back of my head and I hear it. Sometimes in theta, I always say to God that I do my most dangerous praying in theta because I am willing to do whatever God wants. In alpha and beta, not so much because I got things to do, you know. But in theta, I am willing to just surrender. Now, God designed this brain frequency thing for a specific purpose. We go to sleep and we wake up. We are 2 times a day, we are constantly going through theta as we go off to sleep and as we wake up. So 2 times a day, we have this opportunity to really ground ourselves and listen inside. Most of us jump right out of bed and forget about it. But if we can stay there in the covers, just in that place of low brain frequency, and just listen inside to ourselves and listen to the divine talking to us, then we can go on with the rest of our day in a much more grounded place. There's also the final brain frequency is called delta. And that's when we're sleeping, we are healing at an unconscious level. We don't know what the healing is, but God does. And we are detached from the real, the physical world. We are in right brain mode. God is using images and shapes and icons and archetypes and all of those things to help change and soothe and take care of us as we sleep. So it's important. There are some people who never get to delta sleep. They have high anxiety because they never get the rest that they need. Now, in our culture, people love to live in beta. What we need to be grounded and communicating with God is much more time in theta and delta than our schedule and our responsibilities and even our mission work allow us to do. So when I think about self-care and soul care, it's really vitally important that we spend time in relaxation, meditation, and deep sleep healing in order for us to be fully alive and be able to be present in the world. I think I have one more slide, and it's another concept I want to talk to you about. But any questions so far about those brain frequencies? Okay. So one of the things that we know is that there are epigenetic changes to our DNA when we experience trauma. And what an epigenetic change is that something happens to us, it changes how we behave in the world, and then the people who come after us generationally see us behaving that way, and that's normal. So have you ever heard that joke about the young woman got married and she wanted to make a ham the way Diane's saying yes, she's married to a minister. She's probably heard every sermon illustration possible. But for those of you who don't know, this young woman, she knew that for some reason she had to cut the end off the ham. So she cut the end off the ham. And every time she made a ham, she cut the end off of it. It seemed like a waste to her husband, but that's how she learned to do the ham. So she began asking questions. Well, why do we cut the end off the ham? Well, she found out that her grandmother didn't have a pan the right size. So her grandmother started cutting the end off the ham to fit it in the pan. This is what happens to us when we deal with trauma, and it becomes generational trauma. You probably know somebody in your circle of friends who nobody's allowed to take sled riding seriously because 2 generations past, somebody died on a sled. And so you don't sled was now the new rule. And the rest of the generations just go, I don't know why, we don't sled. And it's because of an epigenetic change in our DNA, which causes changes in behavior related to experience. So for instance, in Rwanda, after the genocide in Rwanda, they implemented a nationwide peace training program to deal with this very purpose. They didn't want the next generation to continue to live at war and in strife and in fear because of something that happened culturally. So they wanted to make sure that they began teaching the morality and the peacefulness and the cooperation that they had lost during that time. So we can enter into a community or a family or a church congregation that is experiencing behaviors that are related to trauma from years ago. And I think it's important to keep in mind that that's the case, because it's the same old thing. Oh, this is the way we've always done it. Well, yeah. Why have we always done it? And do we still want to do it? Those last two questions are never really discussed because it requires change and it requires addressing generational trauma sometimes. So we hold trauma in our bodies, our physical bodies. We hold trauma in our community life. We hold trauma in our congregational life. So, you know, United Methodists move pastor to pastor, church to church. In some ways, for some people, that's kind of traumatic. You know, I had a really good connection with a minister at such and such a church. I don't think I'll ever have that connection again with another minister. And so the new minister comes all ready to give you lots of love and you're like, nah, thanks, got it. And then you start going somewhere else. So there's lots of things that happen with regard to generational change and generational trauma that if we look deeper at it, we realize it's an epigenetic change that has occurred in the past that we are now still living out of. So those are some of the things that that I think are important to know about how our brain deals with trauma, how it impacts our living, how it impacts our behaviors, and how it impacts community and congregation. So it's important to keep all those things in mind, just as an awareness that when I go into a mission trip, the people who I'm working with are in fight, flight, or freeze. And then the 16-year-old youth group I bring in has never seen this kind of devastation. They are now in fight, flight, or freeze. They are not going to remember squat. They're not going to remember to, you know, eat their breakfast. They're going to forget where they put their tools and their shoes and everything else. And those are all normal responses to trauma. They are normal behaviors that come out of overstimulation of the central nervous system. So we can either get disgruntled and frustrated that these kids are just not doing the best job they could, and how can you possibly forget where you put the hammers? Or we can just say, yeah, no hammers today. Oh well, they'll surface at some point. These are the kinds of things that I think are important for us as we do mission work, as we engage with our families and we engage with our colleagues, and especially in our church life. We are all coming into that with our own invisible stuff. And the fact that we can stay in community with everybody's individual stuff is nothing short of a miracle. I believe we were designed for community. I believe that we need to do the work of community as congregations. It is really hard work. And if we don't do our own self-care by getting into the frequencies of the brain that allow us to heal from our own injuries, then we just injure each other. And a lot of times you'll find a congregation that has just gotten into the habit of treating each other badly because they have no self-compassion, and they can't, and they have the left side of the brain says it has to be this way, this way, this way, or no way. And when we do that, then we re-traumatize our community and ourselves. So anyway, those are my afternoon thoughts on trauma in the brain. Be happy to open it up for questions, or just some stories that you noticed that some of this information might have triggered. Gonna stop sharing. There we go. So some of your thoughts. Kathleen.
Good afternoon. Going through this whole isolation period now with COVID, what are you expecting to find with the whole mental picture of it? It really, I was a special educator and an elementary school teacher, and you have to have a lot of compassion for these children because I was not inner city, but I was in the DC area.
Mm-hmm.
And you just never know their background. Now, this is going to create some background. And do you have any hints or any ideas? I'm not in the profession any longer, but I do have teenage grandchildren, and they seem to be handling it well, but I think they're keeping it in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. That's really important. This is a trauma for our country and the world, and we are responding to it in different ways. Already at the beginning, we saw feelings of isolation and fear. I am not in control of what's happening around me. And when people get to those places, they begin to live out of the fear center of their brain. You get used to being there, and your rest of your brain kind of shuts down, and there's this this trauma loop that happens, and you just go from fight, flight, or freeze to more input to fight, flight, or freeze, and you never really spend time up in the part of your brain that makes sense of things.
And that feels very common to me.
Yeah.
And I'm widowed, and my oldest son is close, but not like with me, that kind of situation. And people say I look younger than I am, but I know I'm aging. Since I'm retired, I'm 70 now. And so consequently I go, gosh, I want to live to 100 like all these other people.
Right, right. The other thing that I'm finding is that children are spending way more time online. And I see two things happening. One is that they are losing a grip on what's real and not real. So what's real is my parents fighting. I'd rather be over here in my pretend world online. And so they're having a difficult time being present and not dissociating. That's one of the things I see. The other thing I see is that a lot of people are being much more exposed to online grooming and inappropriate contact in a place where, for instance, I have one kid who his father walked out on him. His mother moved to a different state to remarry somebody else. Then she moved back and divorced and married somebody else. So this is like a normal kid, you know, probably in your youth group. He's online, and this guy starts talking to him and starts saying what an awesome kid he is, and he's hungry for that. Oh yeah, I need it. And so this guy ends up, there's a way online, I don't know how to do this, but there's a way online to give money and gifts inside the context of the game. And so he's sending this kid gifts. Nobody's none the wiser. Finally, he groomed him to the point where now he's going to use his cell phone. And now he's going to suggest that they meet. Then the mother sees this, and this has been going on for months. And now there's a big, huge problem. So when I'm working with him, I'm like, so where do you feel this in your body? And he bursts out in tears and he said, it feels just like when my dad left. So that is the doorway into his healing, to recognize that this predator is triggering the loss of something else, and that he needs to work with that loss instead of just going with the motions that this guy's really awesome and he gave me lots of stuff and I really miss him because he said I was an awesome kid, and now he's conflicted because he's not allowed to use his gaming system in his bedroom anymore. He's being punished. He's only allowed 20 minutes a day, whereas, you know, months and months before he had free access 24/7. He could be on that game. So those are the kinds of things I see happening. A lot more potential for abuse and exploitation of kids, and a lot more dissociation of what's real and what's not real.
I just want to add, I think the whole, now that's been 6-7 months, we're all being exposed to some of these things in many different ways. And people are trying to open up and get themselves back into groups.
Right.
But there's still so many of us fearful that we'll catch this. It's such
Right.
an invisible disease.
It's an invisible predator.
Yes, exactly.
And your central nervous system is responding in kind.
Exactly. Thank you for what you've been sharing about this.
You're welcome. We have about 5 or 6 minutes left. If anyone else has a question or a comment or something they would like to share.
I have a question.
Mhm.
I see this just as recently as yesterday in my son.
Mhm.
And okay, so how do I help him? Is medicine or therapy or what? What is the answer?
So I can only tell you what I do as a therapist. I really recommend that people do something just beyond talk therapy. Talk therapy is great. Medication is great if that's what you need. I personally look for somebody who can do Gestalt work. We call it psychodynamic therapy, so that you're getting the body and the mind involved in the process of inner healing. I feel like we're just, in terms of therapy, in terms of counseling, we're all up in our heads. And that's only one part of where we hold our trauma. So for instance, I can talk to somebody about my abusive relationship, and I can come to some really great insights. That's what cognitive behavioral therapy is all about. But then when I'm with my next partner and I flinch when he comes up next to me with a kiss or a hug, my body remembers getting smacked. And so all of a sudden now this other person is in my marriage, my new marriage, and my body remembers this. And so it's really important, I guess all that to say, it's really important to address the whole person, the physical aspects of what's happened to us, as well as the mental and emotional things that have happened to us. I think that boundaries are really, really essential. And those are not things that this generation of parents understands maybe, or has the luxury of doing. But in my talk that you'll hear if you check into the YouTube video, we talk about a soul care, spiritual care aspect of knowing the difference between boulders and backpacks. Boulders are things we need help with. backpack items are things that I'm responsible for. I should be able to feed myself, take my medicine, get up on time, go to work, be a functional human being. If I am not allowed to develop those skills because somebody else is doing them for me, then I have very little, I have impaired the core self-esteem that I need to grow up and to be a functional adult. So for instance, that might look like a kid doesn't want to go to work. And you say, oh, it's okay. If you're not feeling well, don't go to work. And that becomes a pattern of behavior. And then when you're 65, they still haven't worked and they're sitting in your living room and you're both living off your Social Security. There's a problem with the boundary of boulders and backpacks. We need to insist that children do things that are in the physical world and that they have responsibility for, that builds a core inside them of competence and confidence. And out of that will come good executive functioning in the world. If we give people a pass and say, I see this a lot with parenting when children are abused. So one of the parents is physically abusive to the child. And so they get out of that situation and the mom feels so guilty about what happened to the kid that they say, it's okay, honey, you were abused. You don't have to do that. Well, you know what? Yes, they do. Because they got to get their homework done. They got to get their dishes done and get their clothes washed and in the right place. All of those things build competence as a human. And when we give people a pass on building those competencies, they can't function later on. So look at boundaries, look at psychodynamic treatment, and try to stay present with them. Those are my thoughts. Anyway, I have a lot of thoughts. We have 3 minutes left. Anybody have anything else they'd like to add to the mix? I just saw a little person enter a screen. Hello. All right, well, that is my spiel for today. I hope that you've heard loud and clear that soul care is a backpack item and self-care is a backpack item. You need to be doing those things in order to be present enough to help others. Whether it's helping your mom go through dementia or whether it's helping a community heal from a tornado, whatever it is, or a church healing from its own trauma that it's experienced. We require self-care in order to accomplish that task. So.
Thank you. That was very informative. Luckily, Paula's desktop computer didn't work, so I was able to put it on mine so we could both watch.
Great.
So that was very good. Thank you.
Great. You're welcome.
And Deb,
Deborah.
I forgot Pittsburgh is in Eastern time.
Oh,
And
Hey,
I'm in
Judy.
Central.
how are you?
I'm good.
Good to
Very
see
good.
you.
You too.
Deborah,
Right. Yeah.
if this is possible, I don't know if we have the capabilities of having this recorded, but I'd like to listen to it again.
Okay. Bill Jacka is at the conference center recording everything. And they will be linking those things to the United Methodist Women's website under resources somewhere. You will get an email from the planning committee, Sally Lewis and Linda Thayer and others. They're going to be sending a follow-up to this conference that'll have links to both the hour and a half gargantuan talk and this one as well, plus the memorial service and plus everything else that's happened today. So yes, you'll be able to see it again.
Or first.
Or first, right. In your own time frame, Judy.
Bye-bye, dear.
All right, do we need to I'm not sure, do we just exit? I'm looking at my list of things. No, Linda Thayer is up next, and I don't know, I think that's a separate link to a different meeting. So I'm gonna close this meeting and allow you to pick up at the other one. Take care. Thanks for listening, and God bless.
So much. Thank you, Deborah.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Deborah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Deborah.
You're welcome.